Thanks for joining me on episode 1030 of the Inspired Stewardship Podcast.
I'm Braden Douglas. I challenge you to invest in yourself, invest in others, develop your influence, and impact the world by using your time, your talent, and your treasures to live out your calling. Having the ability to lead with impact is key. And one way to be inspired to do that is to listen to this, the Inspired Stewardship Podcast with my friend, Scott Mater.
Then the rest of the group, that the reason that they began to behave differently is because they understood more about how money could affect them. And by understanding that and acting in ways that weren't that way, they began to behave in a different way and inoculated themselves against the negative thoughts and the negative effects.
Welcome and thank you for joining us on the Inspired Stewardship Podcast. If you truly desire to become the person who God wants you to be, then you must learn to use your time, your talent, and your treasures for your true calling. In the Inspired Stewardship Podcast, you will learn to invest in yourself, invest in others, and develop your influence so that you can impact the world.
In today's episode about developing your influence through stewarding your treasures, I talk with you about how money can affect your mindset and behavior. I talk about how important it is to understand how money can affect us if you want to avoid the negative changes. And I also talk about how money doesn't have to influence our mind negatively. As we talk about stewarding your treasures, wouldn't it be great if you could support this podcast and do it without costing yourself an extra dime? Turns out you can. All you have to do is use inspiredstewardship.com/Amazon when you're ready to make a purchase via Amazon, and a small commission will come back to support the show. If you enjoy the show when you're ready to buy from Amazon, just use inspiredstewardship.com/Amazon. Wealth or money and behavior and psychology are all connected. Your thoughts, your behavior, your actions are all linked to your psychology, to your thinking, to your beliefs. And that psychology is affected by things like your genetics, how you were raised and the environment you were raised in, the environment you find yourself in today, and money or wealth can affect that belief system as well, and therefore can affect and influence the way you act towards others. There are tons of studies that show that money and behavior, money and mindset are connected. There's a study from the early 2000s by Dan Ariely, who created an experiment where what he did is he had a rather boring, repetitive task of drawing a circle on a computer screen. And for one group of people, he just asked them to do this task as a favor. For other people, he paid them 50 cents, and for others, he paid them $5. And the interesting thing is that the favor group and the $5 group both did the task faster than the 50-cent group. The favor group did it the fastest, the $5 group the second fastest, and then the 50-cent group the least. And there's been several versions of this study that show that basically we judge things based on social capital, that's the favor group. But when we're paid money, we then begin to look at it in terms of a business capital. Are we getting value, time for money? Are we spending time and getting money that's commensurate with that time? And the $5 was more commensurate than the 50 cents. There's studies that show that whenever you have money or access to money, or even just are reminded of money by people talking about it, by showing you pictures of it and this sort of thing, that you try to do task and be more self-sufficient. Now, to the extent, even if you're given a task that is impossible to do by yourself and told that help is available, you often won't ask for help if you've been primed by thinking about money in advance. And the group that hasn't been primed about money will ask for help. And conversely, if they've then also extended that further and had somebody who perhaps was overburdened with things and dropped them and needed help from you, and the group that was primed to think about money was less likely to actually extend help to them. That's similar to, there's some studies that show that our empathy for others goes down with increased in income. There's also some studies that show that we will sometimes take a lower view of certain ethical decisions, like lying on our taxes, for instance, based on how much money we have. We'll make even other decisions that are unethical based on the value that we put towards money. Our self-view will change. People who are wealthy tend to view that they earned that wealth through their own hard work. And I'm not saying that isn't true, but people who are at a lower socioeconomic scale tend to say that anyone could be rich or anyone could be poor. It's more, quote, the luck of the draw. And there are studies that show that addiction rates go up among wealthy people. There are studies as well that show that money itself can become addictive and become something that is almost a compulsive behavior. Study after study that shows that the children of wealthy people often have more issues or more concerns or more problems. So why do I bring all of this up? Because I think it's important that we recognize that our relationship with money and money's relationship with us are interconnected, that how we have and do with money affects our behavior and our actions. By having that awareness, by recognizing that, we can actually begin to limit it in some. That many of the behaviors that money primes in us tend to be inherently negative. But by being conscious of this, by recognizing it, by seeing this in advance, then you can begin to avoid some of those negative effects. You can make a commitment to volunteer, to give to charity, to donate. You can expand your social circles to include people from other races, from other socioeconomic statuses, from other groups, so that you become aware of that. The truth is that there is an abundance of evidence that money can have a negative influence on our mind, but it doesn't have to. We can consciously choose to act and behave and expose ourselves to thinking and to doing and to other ways of looking at it. It's not a black and white where money always creates this behavior. There are examples, and in all of those studies, there were outliers and people that didn't fall into the general trends. So yes, the majority of people behaved in this way, but not all. And a lot of the studies now are looking at what is it about the people that didn't fall into the general trends. Was it the way they behaved? Was it the way they were raised? Was it things about their other belief systems? And at least early on, most of the results are showing that the fundamental beliefs of those people was different than the rest of the group. That the reason that they began to behave differently is because they understood more about how money could affect them. And by understanding that and acting in ways that weren't that way, they began to behave in a different way and inoculated themselves against the negative thoughts and the negative effects. So that is possible to do. And that is something that you can do so that when you build wealth, the wealth is used for the good and to build the influence in a positive way rather than to negatively affect you and those around you. Thanks for listening.
Thanks so much for listening to the Inspired Stewardship podcast. As a subscriber and listener, we challenge you to not just sit back and passively listen, but act on what you've heard and find a way to live your calling. If you like this episode on the stewardship of treasures, you can sign up for our treasures tips by going to inspiredstewardship.com/treasures or text in the U.S. 44222 treasures tips. And we'll send you 5 weeks of our best tips on stewarding your treasures. Until next time, invest your time, your talent, and your treasures. Develop your influence and impact
the world.